So, Gary, let's go back to the start of the tournament. What were the hopes, the expectations on the hosts, Ivory Coast?
Considering it had been rescheduled, it had been put off, and so on, they had enough time. Everybody was hoping that they'll be ready for the world.
Uh-huh.
And boy, did they deliver. We saw very pristine pitches. We saw a country that was prepared to host the rest of Africa, and a Confederation of African Football that was also ready from the broadcast point of view, which made it one of the most successful, in terms of broadcasting. There were memes for days, there were shorts, and it was a real festival that, if I may use just about 15 seconds to explain, it's one of those AFCONs that may never happen again. You know why? Because Ivory Coast was hosting it. They had the real good fortune of having about 11 of the teams that qualified being in the same sub-region, meaning that in a continent where air travel has always been a problem for successive AFCONs because people just cannot afford to go and support their teams. This time, so many countries could bus their fans over a couple of days and get into the Ivory Coast, making it a wonderful, wonderful spectacle and a colorful AFCON, and indeed the best attended AFCON of all time.
But in terms of the actual footballing team, perhaps the pressure was on them as the hosts, and the group stage didn't exactly start very well. Well, it started all right, but it didn't end very well for them, and they only sort of clinched their way into the knockout stages relying on other results as well.
There was so much expectation for them, and it's unclear why they didn't actually fire, because they had a coach who was good as well, but something in the communication was not happening between the boss, the gaffer, and his charges, and it meant that they had to wait till very late because they won their first game, yes, against Guinea-Bissau by 2-0, didn't they? And then Nigeria beats them by 1-0. Then Equatorial Guinea beats them by 4-0. So just a lack of what happened elsewhere for them to go through. Credit to them, they then took the difficult decision of firing the manager, rather than persisting with him, and it turned out to be an inspired decision. But then they got it right, and they motored through with the support of, the locals behind them all the way to the final, and eventually they clinched the trophy. Very interesting story it was.
It is interesting, and you mentioned the sacking of the manager. To do that midway through a tournament, yes, as we mentioned, the group stage didn't quite pan out the way they would have liked it to, but they still made it to the knockout rounds. Quite a brave decision to sack Jean-Louis Gasset, wasn't it?
It was a brave decision, but I think at that point they realized that there was nothing to lose, because what we hear, the signals we were picking from inside the dressing room was that Jean-Louis Gasset was not able to communicate properly, or if he was communicating, his instructions were not being taken by the players. He just couldn't identify there was something missing as well. And so Yacine Diallo, the president of the Ivorian Football Federation, that it's been decided that he will be given the job on a temporary basis, which probably gave him an impetus to coach beyond himself, because remember, he didn't have that sort of experience in the past, and he just got it done. Game after game, they just seemed to get better and better and better. They went on to win their third title.
Yes, and what a day that turned out to be, because it was a comeback against Nigeria to win that final as well. And yeah. Sebastian Haller has written many stories for the Ivory Coast. He did so in that tournament, scoring in the semi-final, scoring in the final, this after battling testicular cancer as well. He must be a hero to everybody in the Ivory Coast.
Of course, it was the feel-good story that every tournament needs, So in the circumstances that he did, he had a terrible final. Remember, he did nothing in the final, and then they just persisted with keeping him on the pitch, and then with that touch, he got the goal in. I remember the coach, MS Faye, also saying that it must have been fated or written in the stars, because remember, MS Faye took over the leadership of the team on his birthday as well.
It really was written in the stars.
Exactly. He took over on his birthday. There was the whole Sebastian Haller thing, you know. And yeah, all those things meant that it seemed that Ivory Coast were destined for it, you know. And because of if you were in Ivory Coast, I've been privileged. This was about my 8th AFCON or so that I've covered. And this was the most jamming AFCON that I've been in, like hands down. It was a party. You know, yes, it was so good. It was so good. Yeah, and it felt like, guys, like you need, for all they've done, the infrastructure, the roads, you know, the quality of the facilities, the pitches and everything. Like you have to give these people something, you know. So it felt like that, and it seemed just deserved for them to win in the way they did. Yes.
Absolutely. It sounds like we missed out on a big party in the Ivory
Ah,
Coast,
yeah,
obviously.
you did.
But obviously with the manager, MS Faye, coming in in that interim basis, to go on and win a tournament after, 4 games? I mean, that's like what dreams are made of.
Yeah. And I think that he's continued in that vein as well. So some people said he rode in the wings of the Ivory Coast being host. Some people said, in addition, he was lucky because he took over at a time when the team had nothing to lose. And so they went into every game like it was a final, and that he couldn't replicate that form after the tournament, that he's proven them wrong. Ivory Coast have been one of the better teams this year in the AFCON. He's actually due, you know, he's actually been nominated for Coach of the Year at the African Player of the Year. He was nominated for African Player of the Year, African Coach of the Year for this year at the CAF Player of the Year Awards. That's right.
Well, richly deserved, obviously, with what he's done.
Yes, richly deserved with the kind of form. Arguably, only Morocco has been the most consistent team because they have been imperious this year as well. And they showed it, you know, a bit. There was high expectations for them in the AFCON as well, weren't there? Because of what they had done at the World Cup in Qatar, it was expected that they would sort of just motor in the tournament and win. But, you know, the AFCON gods had a lot up their sleeves in terms of the scripting. And they weren't the only ones that surprised in terms of Ivory Coast winning, not starting well, but winning. This year, Natalie, there were no debutants, which was very odd because of some of the experiences we had in previous AFCONs. There were no debutants. Every side in this 2014 tournament had prior experience at the Nations Cup. Only 5 qualifiers had never before won a game at the tournament before this year. But it changed when Namibia started like a house on fire. They dispatched Tunisia, who are perennial slow starters, it must be said. Cape Verde stunned Ghana, who had a terrible AFCON. Mozambique drew Egypt, but that was only because Mo Salah had a last-ditch equalizer. And we had so many of those stories in the tournament, like so many stories like that. Which was a reason why this tournament was so enthralling from start to finish, because it seemed like every single time something mentally, crazy was happening the whole time. So these were some of the stories that define this AFCON and why it will live long in the memory. Yeah.
And in terms of, if I think it back to the Euros, just in this summer gone, you look at some of the results there. It felt like a lot of let's say the lower ranked nations were able to compete a lot more with the higher ranked nations. Is that the similar sort of thing happening in Africa too?
Yeah. And I think it's across the world. If you watch, I was at the Euros also, thankfully. So, I tell you what, my theory is the democratization of football tactics and knowledge is responsible for all this, because football softwares that hitherto were the preserve of the richer nations and the teams that, that could afford and were bigger traditionally, is now all democratized. Now, any football federation with any decent budget, there's so many software around that you can use for player analysis, video analysis. It is no longer the preserve of the so-called big wigs of world football. And that is what I think is happening now. Also, because of the same factor, more teams in the more established leagues, Natalie, are going further and further afield to get talent for cheaper than just so that it's become more competitive. So, for example, if you are Manchester United now, you have the opportunity to go to Mali, as we've seen Manchester United do, to go and bring a 16-year-old to Manchester United. Previously, that was not possible because this player would have had to play in the local Malian league, have had to play in a big African team before coming to Europe. Now, scouting is so advanced that Real Madrid can go straight to Endrick, go and bring Endrick without any intermediary. That's what's happening. Barcelona have just got a player straight from Ghana who is 18, 19 years old, and he's in the Barca B team, likely to be in the main Barca team in a few months. So with all that happening, it means that if you are Bosnia, you are Slovenia, you are Mauritania, you are Cape Verde, you are Mauritius, you can now get a coach in the backwaters of the French league who is so promising, and you can to pay him just about $20,000 or $20,000 or even $5,000 a month, but he's hungry to make his name. He's going to come at the AFCON and show everybody what he's got. You've also got teams in Africa especially that are able to get players that are born in Europe, and there's so many more of them now. So you may be Ghana, you may be having your top players play for Arsenal, West Ham United, you may be Nigeria having your top players play for Villarreal or something, but Mauritius are going to have a player in the French Division 2 who is very technical, who has access to good training. When they meet you at the Africa Cup of Nations, the gulf in quality is not so wide anymore, and that's what we are seeing at the AFCON year on year as well. The quality is more evenly distributed, I think.
Yeah, which is only good for football. That's what we want at the end of the day. Absolutely. Just remind us then about those celebrations. When Ivory Coast sealed that victory over Nigeria, what was it like? What were the people like? The hosts, the fans. What were they like? And how did they greet the team when they must have had trophy celebrations?
I mean,
can't remember?
This your podcast. So at this point, let me just paint it in the minds of the listeners. I'm holding my head, just remembering how chaotic, beautifully and wonderfully chaotic it was. Now, this is Ivory Coast, who just 10 years ago were in the throes of a civil war. Since then, they've had nothing like this. They won their last title in 1992, before this one. They've had the Drogba generation, right? The one in 2015, okay, where they beat Ghana. But for it to be on their home turf since 2015 like this, after the Civil War, with spending out over $1 billion, we understand, a people who needed this unifying force so much. It was wonderful. The streets were filled with people. There was orange everywhere. And it was one of those AFCONs that there was a song, guess what? That was not the official song of the African Cup of Nations. That became the official song. So the official song of the AFCON, and then another song that had just gone viral that had been. So it was Coup de Mato. It was called Coup de Mato. And they had a dance, bam, bam, bam. And like everybody from president to the kids on the street to even the neutrals, it was like a party atmosphere across the country. And it was wonderful. The abiding image in my mind was that in the middle of a street in Abidjan, there was a range. No, it was a Maserati that has stopped in the middle of the road. The occupants of the Maserati, obviously rich, have stopped to join a public bus. The people had got out of the bus and they were all jamming in the middle of the street, in the middle of Abidjan, and nobody had a care in the world. They were just jamming because the Ivory Coast were champions of Africa. Like, it's so organic. It's not something you can script, and that is the AFCON what it is. It's so organic, it's so raw, it's so fresh, and it's so pure.
Yeah. I wanted to pick up on someone you mentioned, Didier Drogba. I saw that you had a little sit down with him, and you covered whether or not he would like to become the Ivorian Football Federation president. Is that something that he's considering?
Literally 2 days ago, he had an interview where he was asked this question, and he was asked if he's dreaming about it. He said lately he does not even have dreams. And that's because he has struggled. So it's one of those paradoxes, isn't it? That on the global stage, he's so big, but for some reason, he's not able to touch base with the people at home. He's not able to transfer the love he has at places like Marseille and Chelsea to the people who are going to vote for him. They say he's lost touch with the grassroots. He's not a people person in the Ivory Coast. So if he wants to be president, he has to scale that hurdle and the trust of the people back home, so that the way he's revered around the world, he would have that legitimacy back home as well for people to vote for him. Yeah.
I see. So wait and see then for Didier Drogba.
Yeah, wait and see. So, like Samuel Eto'o became the Football Federation president, but Eto'o was always a people person. That's the difference. Drogba, even when he was playing for the Ivory Coast, it felt like there was a slight disconnect between him and the people that Samuel Eto'o had on lock. You know, he was charismatic. Drogba seemed to be, yeah, we love you, but you are over there and we are over here. So yeah,